that's what we'll be talking about. The system that we put in place improved efficiency of the field personnel who could focus on service delivery instead of filling laborious forms. The system proactively assisted field personnel in their work, improving the performance of the field personnel. This session will highlight the benefit of moving from a manual system to a digital system, and more specifically in the context of empowering female field personnel through spillover effects also. So not only that, what we saw, and we'll talk about this, is that not only that we, sorry, I need to turn off my phone for a second. Just allow me 1 second. Or we should do that before the start of the session. Anyways, back to the session. So essentially, this is a BP product that was rolled out. Initially, it was a manual process. It was rolled out in very challenging environments in rural Pakistan. And Aisha will, in a minute, cover about what the reasons for rollout of this product was and why we did what we did. Sort of establish the context, but then the conversation will move to more of how the data was captured manually and fed back into a feedback loop so that we could respond to events happening in the field and make sure that the business model that we were establishing would actually work and we could actually pivot and tweak. And I'll invite Claire to comment on that. And then we'll go into the real meat of the presentation, which is that given all this context, how we put together a system which digitally transformed a manual process into a digital enabled solution, which could be deployed for very low literacy field force called CRP, community personnel or community representative. Or Aisha, you could correct me if I said that wrong. And when you start to talk. So we'll talk all about that. And I think finally, as I said earlier, there were spillover effects, not only that the CRPs were able to do their work better and the overall efficiency of delivery of the product to the target pregnant and lactating women improved. We also saw a lot of other spillover effects in terms of women empowerment. So I won't talk about that now, but we will talk about that towards the end because we did actually do a survey at the end to see what else happened out there when we introduced this digital platform and gave mobile phones, which had that platform deployed and gave it to the CRPs in the field. So having said that, let me start out by introduction of the panelists. We have Dr. Claire Null, a principal researcher at Mathematica. She specializes in providing comprehensive measurement and evidence support to various organizations with a PhD in agriculture and resource economics from UC Berkeley and over 15 years of experience. She focuses on developing measurement systems and rigorous evaluations in Asia and Africa. Dr. Null has led consortia supporting initiatives like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and their market tests, and currently heads the MLE team for the Foundation's Women Economic Empowerment Strategy. We also have Aisha Tariq with us from RSPN. She's a development practitioner with 7 years of experience in designing, managing, and implementing multi-sector development programs with a focus on rural development as well as nutrition, maternal health, emergencies response, and women's empowerment. Currently, she heads a nutrition project funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at RSPN. And my quick introduction is that I'm Imran Zia. I also have been part of this project, and in some ways I will become panelist, and Claire and I will switch the roles at some point later in the presentation. So we'll team tag and walk you through this story of ours. With that, let's start out with a problem statement. If I may ask Aisha to please, give us the background of this project and specifically address 3 things. What are BEP supplements? Why are they important for Pakistan? And how do you get these BEP products in the hands of the PLWs, an abbreviation for pregnant and lactating women, and the associated business model to do that? So over to you, Aisha.
Thank you, Imran. I'll start with what is BEP. That stands for Balanced Energy and Protein. It's a daily nutritional supplement for undernourished pregnant women in which protein provides less than 25% of total energy content. It's a supplement which is recommended by the World Health Organization for women in undernourished populations because it primarily reduces the risk of stillbirth among pregnant women and reduces the risk of small for gestational age neonates. Next slide, please. Right. So here we'll discuss exactly why Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation wanted to fund this BEP project for Pakistan. So Pakistan has one of the highest rates of stillbirth in the world, and almost 1 in 5 babies in Pakistan weigh less than 2.5 kilograms at birth, putting them at risk, an increased risk of neonatal mortality, stunting, and long-term health effects. At the same time, the condition for women is also not that great. So statistics show that about 49% of pregnant women, they do not go for recommended ANC visits. 34% of women deliver their babies at home. And 14% of women of reproductive age are underweight, 30% are malnourished, and 41% of pregnant women are anemic, which obviously impacts children's health. I think the most impact on children is that we see in Pakistan is that a lot of children are stunted. That's almost 40% of the children born are stunted in Pakistan. 18% are underweight, and we experience 29% wasting among infants across the country. And these statistics are according to the National Nutrition Survey of 2017 and 18. We see that undernourishment is a common problem, obviously, across all wealth quintiles, but the government programs only serve the poorest, which is people falling within the poverty scorecard of 1 to 16. And the government of Pakistan obviously was interested in exploring the potential for private sector business models to reach the underserved middle income women with BEP. And that's where RSPN comes in, where we focused on women within the wealth quintiles of 2 and 5. Next slide, please. So this is the actual product that was being sold in our communities. The recommended dose of one for one pregnant woman is 75 grams of sachet every day, which includes 400 kilocalories, energy, and 10.5 grams of protein. It's more than half essential macronutrient recommendations during pregnancy. It also contains 24 essential nutrients such as vitamin A, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and it is made of a blend of peanuts, lentils, chickpeas, dry milk, amongst other ingredients. And as we've already mentioned, it helps reduce the risk of stillbirth in children. It's a solution that provides all the essential nutrients and the additional energy needed by PLWs that are usually missing from their daily diet. And the price at which we were selling this product in our rural setting was initially priced at 30 rupees. And considering it turned into a business model, and this price subsequently increased when we reduced the subsidy to 0. Next slide, please. Right. So the rural market test sought to test the potential uptake and the consumption frequency of BEP, as well as its impact on the nutritional status of pregnant and lactating women when it was sold via our community resource persons, that's CRPs, at the price of 30 rupees per sachet. The rural market test covered a population of 450,000 people across 3 districts, Bahawalpur, Kamrasha, Dadkot, and Jacobabad, and of which around 21,000 women were PLWs at any given time. And the project is being run in remote rural areas that are uncovered and unserved by the government, LHWs, and currently we are working with 300 community resource persons, that's 100 CRPs per district, who sell Welma along with other health, hygiene, nutrition products through door-to-door visits and community meetings. The model over time has obviously evolved where through the market test has evolved where we've introduced performance-based incentives for CRPs. We've piloted and scaled up the sale of other products, primarily under the banner of health, hygiene, nutrition, and home care. we initially piloted with 25 CRPs across in each district, and we've now moved to 300 CRPs across 3 districts. And we've also introduced a smartphone app to help CRPs manage their sales. Next slide, please. Right, so this is the profile of our female field workers. We've bifurcated them into junior and senior community resource persons. The typical profile includes that they're all female, aged between 18 to 40 years, preferably married, 5+ years of education with good communication and marketing skills, and they have a strong family support and push to work in their respective clusters and have no mobility restrictions. And it is essential for them to be residents of the same village and community that they serve and work in. The key activities for each CRP is to first map all the households in her respective cluster, which amounts to 1,500 people or 230 households. They're supposed to conduct door-to-door visits to induce sales to registered PLW specifically for WELMA, for BEP, and they're also conducting awareness sessions amongst their community members, primarily targeting mothers-in-law and PLWs. For senior CRPs, just to understand what the difference is, each senior CRP is assigned 9 junior CRPs, where all junior CRPs collect their orders and submit them to the senior CRP, who then collects the money and submits them to our district office, from where we then generate orders and their deliveries. Initially, the compensation for junior and CRPs, we were giving them a compensation of 3,000 rupees per month. However, from January 2024, we completely eliminated the stipend because we wanted to incentivize them to sell their products and earn a profit, not base.
Aisha, please, 30 seconds, and then we'll need to move on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So this is the order placing system where junior CRPs bring their orders and money to the senior CRP. Senior CRP then obviously gives it to sends it to the district office, from where the warehouse in charge prepares their orders, gives them to the territory officer, who then delivers all their orders to the senior CRPs, and then the junior CRPs visit the senior CRP to collect their respective baskets. The product delivery system is basically the warehouse keeps the record of the products. They then send a purchase order to the manufacturer, who then delivers within 8 to 20 days. The product is delivered to the warehouse. The warehouse then again compiles the orders, gives them to the territory officers, who then delivers it to the senior CRPs and the junior CRPs. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Aisha, for explaining that. And as many of the audience and welcome audience, I was waiting for all of you to join. Welcome to the session. I do encourage you to take notes and note down your questions, and we will have time at the end for you to ask those questions. And again, Aisha, thank you for explaining all of this. And as the audience can appreciate, this is fairly complex. So, when we say that it's just a BEP product and we're trying to get into the hands of PLWs, there's a lot that's happening in the background. Now, having said that, so there were 2 legs of this project. One was the actual rollout of the product that Aisha elaborated upon. But then there's another very important aspect of this project, and that is, of course, also relevant to this global forum, which is the measurement, learning, and evaluation. How do you collect data? How do you feed the data back so that you can make an assessment of how the rollout is going? Is the business model working? Is the product getting adopted? What do we need to do to change course, maybe pivot? And on that, I'll invite Claire to perhaps talk a little bit about the second leg of this project, which is the feedback mechanism to monitor the product rollout, and the business model that Aisha described. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Imran, and thank you, Aisha. Welcome everyone today. Yeah, I think let me first start with probably some terminology that everyone who's participating is familiar with, but just to say that we will refer to MLE, or measurement, learning, and evidence generation, as we talk about this leg of the project, as Imran was saying. And the reason this was really important is because this was more than just a business model. So if this were purely a business model, then RSPN probably wouldn't needed to have known anything more than just how much product were they selling, and that would have been the basis for deciding whether the business model was effective or not. But since we also had social objectives through this market test, that RSPN was specifically trying to reach pregnant and lactating women, and also to make sure that a given woman was purchasing frequently enough that she could experience the health benefits of the product. So just having the product once in a while is unlikely to make a big difference for her or her baby's health. So we wanted to be able to see if we were able to create a habit of consumption in which women were taking BEP on a frequent enough basis. So at the same time that the business model part was getting set up, we were also making plans for how we would collect and use data throughout the market test to help to optimize the business model and assess whether it was also delivering on the social objectives, and figure out what else needed to be done in order for it to do so. So for the MLE component, we had essentially 4 objectives. The first was to assess whether we could cost effectively create demand for BEP among target consumers. So this product was being introduced as something that women would purchase for the first time. We knew that the government was already distributing it to the poorest women, but we were trying to create a branded alternative that women would spend money on. And so we needed to figure out how could we create demand, but with the least expenses possible, ideally, because any expenses on demand creation is going to eventually have to end up back in the product price. And we wanted to keep that as low as possible. So we were exploring these different methods, such as the door-to-door visits that Aisha was describing. We also, as I was saying earlier, wanted to use data to optimize the business models for sustainability. So as Aisha mentioned, eventually the subsidies were reduced, thinking about business sustainability, and then also the impact, as I was saying, in terms of were we reaching the women who needed the product the most, and were they consuming frequently enough to experience health benefits? And then we wanted to sort of be projecting out ahead, thinking about looking into the future, engaging the potential, what were the prospects for taking this business model out of the 3 initial test sites and going to a larger scale with that, and also generating learning. So not just the quantitative data, but also really understanding what factors were at play in terms of determining success, contributing to success, or standing as barriers, thinking about not just in Pakistan, but also globally for partners who were interested in expanding BEP. So at this point, Imran, I'd like to turn it back to you, actually, because your team led a lot of the day-to-day work on collecting data and supporting RSPN. It was really the community resource persons who collected the data, and then it came to your team for processing. So I think it would be great if you could tell us a little bit more about how that worked.
Oh, so we are now assuming different roles, I guess. So I'm being put on the spot. I thought my job was easy, but let me try. So essentially, thank you, Claire, for explaining that. I mean, that was very important, and I think the slide that we're seeing is essentially different data pipelines, and this is different streams of data that would feed into a lot of what Claire talked about in terms of making the right decisions and whatever have you. So first of all, you would go out in the field, and this would be done by the CRPs, and that would be PLW mapping, because not every single home will have a PLW. So you'll need to map out your area that you're assigned to as CRP and go out and figure out and register women who are potentially can be part of the program. So then essentially that's CRP and SB records, which is the second component here on your left. In the big parentheses that you see. Then you also have HCP records, because these are healthcare professionals where the women might get referred to, or there was an associated urban business model also that we will not talk about. This program was rolled out in both rural and urban, but we will be focusing on rural today, which is what Aisha's team was concerned with and deploying. And Claire and at Mathematica, and we at CERT were helping with the MLE part, like what Claire just described. And then the pharmacies would also have this product mostly in the urban area, so you won't talk about that. And then obviously there is supervisory staff, and they are collecting all sorts of data, and they are also checking the work of CRPs and SBs and SBs. SBs were Sitara Bajis, but again, we won't talk about that because that was part of the urban model. But the supervisor will also look at the work of the CRP and make sure that the data that they're collecting is good, it's fine, and then pass it on to further processing. So just giving a flavor for how this was done. But here's the most critical piece, and if you can flip to the next slide. So this is how a CRP would actually work, right? I mean, this is literally taking a sheet of paper, writing down, if you know a little bit of Urdu, on your left-hand side, it's the name of PLWs written, and then when you go door to door, whether you are registering the PLW or whether you are paying them a visit on a periodic basis, once a PLW is identified as a potential consumer of the product, and then you need to go repeatedly to that household, so that whenever they run out of the product, you can supply them and also generally see how they are doing. And then at other times, you might even want to get some vitals from them and record them also. So this was literally done on paper, and obviously once you record this on paper, this for us to make sense of this and to do any sort of analysis on this data that's being collected manually on sheets of paper, it has to be recorded somewhere, right? And that's where we sort of had this very partial, half manual, half automated system. And what you're seeing in front of you, essentially, we built a small form or a couple of forms on top of Google Sheets. So instead of someone having to type all this data directly into a spreadsheet, we gave them a slightly nicer format so that they could enter data and we could do a little bit of validation. But here's the problem. The problem is that someone enters this data on a piece of paper. Now that piece of paper needs to make its way, and then first it needs to go to the supervisor, and supervisor needs to make sure that the data is right, and supervisor is not going to be there every day. So maybe after 3-4 days, the CRPs will. Let's not advance the slides.
Oh, not yet. Okay, please. Sorry, I thought maybe you would want to see them.
Yeah, please, please, yeah. And so, and I'll just prompt when I need to go to the next slide. So the supervisors will, check the data and then pass it on to data entry persons, right? And the data entry persons are geographically at a different location from where the actual work is happening. So you can imagine there's a transportation delay, and once it gets to the people who are entering data, the number of people who are entering data is limited, right? I mean, if you have 100 CRPs in the field, you probably have 5 data entry folks, and that obviously creates a bottleneck because they're just punching away the data. So the long story short, if you can actually maybe actually it will just break the flow. So we'll talk about that later. So essentially, what would happen is I'll just verbally describe it instead of showing a slide. So what would happen is that by the time this data is digitized and the CERT and Mathematica team gets their hand on it and we run all the sophisticated stata code for analysis and all that, it would be almost 15 days from the time the data was actually captured on a piece of paper to the time that it actually gets analyzed and can be looked at, and we could make sense of what's going on out in the field. Now, 15 days is a lot of time, right? And then any course correction, any feedback that we can provide, for the operations of how the product rollout is working, and that will have a delay of 15 days, right? And that's not very good, right? And that's one of the key issues in all of this, right? So half manual, half automated process, not good at all. So let me now switch gears. I've spoken enough. And Aisha, let me ask you, the CERT team at this point, sort of realized, and Mathematica team realized that, this was taking way too long to analyze this data. And obviously we would like to have this data on our fingertips if we were to make, correct, a quick course correction. So we kept proposing that, we should go an all digital solution where we eliminate this initial paper entry of data, right? But then there was some reluctance on part of RSPN to implement it because perhaps, and so I won't comment on that, but I'll hand it over to you to explain what was the reason that there was reluctance that, we should try a digital solution. Over to you, Aisha.
Right. Thank you, Imran. So there were many reasons why RSPN initially showed a reluctance for the digital solution. I think our main apprehension was, I'll be honest, budgetary constraints. Considering that only 15% of our CRPs across the 3 districts had an Android phone, this was coming out to be a huge cost, almost around 18 million rupees. And back then, we did not have the financial cushion for such a huge and hefty procurement. But I think this was the only time where we were happy for the Pakistani rupee to have depreciated against the dollar. So we had that cushion suddenly appeared. Second, 20% of our CRP, the main apprehension after the budgetary constraint was that 20% of our CRPs have only received the primary education, while only 30% have cleared middle school. And considering such low literacy rates amongst our target audience, we were apprehensive that this would be a huge hindrance for digitizing data. And also that more than 10% of our CRPs had never owned or used a feature or a smartphone. So this was a major concern. This was a point that we had to consider when we were thinking of switching modes of data collection. In addition, Android usage amongst our CRPs was less than 5%. And that meant that once we provided them with phones, CRPs would require a lot of training, a lot of hand-holding to switch from paper-based information collection to a digitized system, and to basically move that human resource from where we were building their capacity for marketing skills and communication skills and entrepreneurial skills. We had to work a lot with our CRPs for them to be able to operate a phone and then operate an app which specifically concentrated on just data collection for our respective projects. And in addition to that, in almost 85% of our clusters, CRPs even to date face a lack of network service. So as the application was initially supposed to be online, RSPN would not have been able to receive real-time data, which would have made the entire effort of digitization moot. So if we were not getting real-time data, there was no point of switching from paper-based, which you've already mentioned, presented a 15-day lag, to digitization, which then again was still not, if due to the lack of network surface, would still not be giving us real-time information. Moreover, as I've already mentioned, we work in remote rural areas of Sindh and southern Punjab. The internet connectivity of 3G and 4G was still a huge concern and still poses a lot of issues for us today. So these were a few issues that because of which RSPN was quite apprehensive from switching from paper-based to digitization. But I think now would be a good time where you can elaborate on how you swept us off our feet when you showed us the prototype.
So we planted this, didn't we? So we had thank you, Aisha, for that. So I think the realization was that at Mathematica and stuff that we ought to do something about it. And I think we were convinced that if we build this application right, then it would actually help RSPN. And I think thank you, Aisha, for mentioning some of the challenges. And as some of the audience can relate to it, this is a very different challenge and very different set of circumstances from where and how your software operates, right? You're sitting in a city, you are getting your full, 3G, 4G signal, you're a fairly literate person, You want a very feature-rich application, whatever you're doing. You want a lot of capabilities in that application. And that is very different from the reality of rural Pakistan, where you have someone who is just a fifth grade graduate, barely, primary education, needs, probably is going to use a smartphone for the very first time. And not only that, you're working in an environment which is very challenging, like what Aisha just mentioned. That's, the signals will go in and out. So normally all of us use apps which will stop working as soon as the signal will go away, and you lose internet connectivity. But in this case, you have to build a solution which is resilient to these network outages, and the CRPs ought to be able to keep working and be able to do their work and collect the right data. And whenever the internet would become available, it syncs up to the server and uploads and downloads the data that it needs. So those were the challenges that we had to address. And I think it's a good time to talk about that, because really the way we built this was that, number one, we built it with the user in mind, right? And with all these challenges in mind. And given that, what we did was we actually created a prototype, and every so often we would have, every quarter we would have this meeting called a steering committee meeting, where all the big shots associated with the products would show up, and we'll make larger decisions. So we actually showed a prototype, and I think thank you for projecting this. And on the left hand side, you can see the application that we built, and this prototype we socialized it at one of the steer codes and said, here's what we have come up with. It's multilingual, does not have to be English. It can be, you can change the language, you can change the prompts and the data entry to Sindhi, you can change it to Urdu, you can change it to English. Whatever the end user feels comfortable with. And it was also built with this notion that what I just described, instead of packing a lot of features into the app, which is normally how you would build app, you would actually minimize the features that the app would have, to the extent that it just gets the job done, but no more complexity. And just creating that right balance. And the way we were able to create that right balance later on is that once we had showed that prototype, and I'm sort of moving ahead with my story in the interest of time, is that we showed this initial prototype, and we also emphasized that will be building this with the user, right? So we were incorporating human-centered design and all of that, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this was very well received, and the ISPN team and we had representative from Gates Foundation, who were one of the sponsors of the project. They were able to see that this is worth taking a risk, right? And then we, of course, went ahead and built the solution and rolled it out to the couple of districts where Aisha's teams were working. So that's essentially the process, and I think. Once we got the approval to move forward, one of the things that we did was that we would build an initial prototype, and then we'll go out in the field, and just like I said, we'll actually test it with the user, right? So we'd make a trip into the rural Sindh and Bahawalpur, where RSPN teams were working. And literally, what this digital transformation did was, we have this slide here, and on the left-hand side, you could see that the benefits of this approach that we obviously pitched to the steering committee was that you have a 4-week cycle on paper form, right? You have the field force enters data on sheets of paper. It needs to be verified by the supervisor. Then it goes to data entry officer. Then it goes to the teams at Mathematica and SERP, where we run our stata code, generate the dashboard, and then that insights are fed back into the overall program management, right? So you could see that this is literally a 4-week cycle. And on the right hand side is what we wanted to achieve, right? This is literally, and the reason it's not real time, we say 0 to 1 days, is because of the fact that Aisha just mentioned that internet bandwidth is not available. Even if you are going to do your work, you might actually have to go to go to a spot where there was enough internet bandwidth available so that you could upload all of this data. And one of the things that you have realized is that, when you're capturing this data, and if you're going to enable a CRP to capture all of this data, then some of the error checking can happen right up front when you're entering the data. So instead of previously, what would happen is that the data entry clerk might spot an error that, oh, this is inconsistent, or this field is missing because maybe the supervisor missed it. And then the longer it takes you to catch an error, the harder it is to fix, because now you have to make phone calls back to the supervisor and the CRP, to get the data corrected. In this case, the data being captured is error free to begin with, right? So all of that would help you, not in real time, but almost in real time, be able to process this and make sense of the data. So that this is essentially what we were able to digitally transform the system from something that would take 4 weeks to literally something that would take a couple of days to to achieve the same results. So let me switch, having described this in somewhat of a detail. And of course, that's our spiel also. But let me ask you, Aisha, what were the major benefits of deploying the app? Specifically, how did it help improve the CRP performance? Because when the rubber meets the road, that's the proof, right? So I can say whatever I want to say about all the great things we did, but you tell us, how did it work out for you?
Thank you, Imran. I think when we saw the prototype, all we could see was how much easier it's going to make our lives for us at the head office level, as well as for the CRPs. So with regards to the app, I think it improved performance at 2 levels. I'll start with the RSPN. At the RSPN level, we were managed now after the app. We had a systemized record of CRP activities, and barring internet connectivity issues, we were receiving real-time data. We can now efficiently and effectively track the CRP performance, and we have a tailored monitoring plan for each district. This time-efficient feedback loop has overall helped improve CRP performance in terms of household visits, in terms of sales, order placement. The digitization efforts by SERP also became a basis for designing the inventory management system that has helped ensure steady supply of all products to all districts, as well as ensuring transparency in orders and deliveries to CRPs. Moving to CRPs, the app has helped improve their performance, where CRPs are now updating registration. Initially were updating registration once every quarter, but with the app, it can be done at any particular visit. This has reduced the time lag. It has improved the sale of BEP, as well as the other health, hygiene, nutrition, home care products that the CRPs are selling. It's easier for the CRPs to now identify PLWs quickly. Time that was being wasted in filling tiresome paper forms, CRPs are now able to dedicate it to making sales. In addition, with features like color coding for household visits, automated profit calculation, and placing orders online, CRPs are now able to tailor their daily routine, and they're able to focus more on areas that require immediate action and attention. Today, we can see the success of our CRPs from the following numbers. Like, CRPs today are ordering a basket worth of, on average, 15,000 rupees. And the majority are making a profit of around 22,000, depending on their individual basket mix. Considering that the CRPs were being given a 3,000 rupee stipend from the beginning of the project till December 2023, where there was no stipend. Basically, stipend stopped from January onwards this year. It's imperative to know that CRPs are now working themselves and earning a sizable income without any additional support from the program. And this is quite a feat. Cumulatively, in the month of May, we've received a total order worth of 4.4 million rupees, and sales have amounted to a little over 4 million. So I think overall, we see that since we've provided CRPs with the phones and they've access to this app, all CRPs can now engage. They've also started engaging in mobile banking. We've opened 300 mobile wallets for our 300 female workers. And thus we can see that the app has really benefited the CRPs, especially in terms of ease of business.
Okay, great. And thank you, Aisha, for that feedback. I mean, obviously, it warms your heart when we actually do something and it's meaningful. And one of the things we at Mathematica at SERP are very concerned with is actually trying to help the people who live in more challenging conditions than many of us who live in cities, and that's very gratifying that we are able to serve that community. So I think you already mentioned that, Aisha, to some extent, and I think we had some challenges because you already had a business model going, you already had this paper-based form. And then we had to move these CRPs from this paper-based system to a digital system. So there's a lot we could discuss, but in the interest of time, we won't do that. There were multiple trainings we did. We did 3-day-long trainings on all of that. So I'm not going into do that, but just for the audience, there's a lot of effort that went into actually initially onboarding the CRPs. In the 2 districts where that app was rolled out and this infrastructure was rolled out. But then we did something interesting in Jacobabad, right? That was a district that came on board later, right? And then we could actually deploy this from day one. So anything you want to talk about in terms of what difference you saw in Jacobabad from day one versus these other districts where this app was actually introduced much later?
Right. So in Jacobabad, so the different trainings that we conducted for Jacobabad and Bahawalpur and Kamrushadad Court. So for Jacobabad, it was a trial run for all of us, for SERP, for Mathematica, for RSPN, where we, I think, initially had a 2 to 3 days training with a very small session on digital literacy, followed by a run through of what the app was about and literally half a day for a practice session. But I think the major shift and the uptake of and basically the acceptance of the app, I think we see it for Bahawalpur and Kamrushadad Court, who actually went through all that hard work of filling out those paper forms and then switching to a digitized system. And that's where we improvised from our learnings from Jacobabad that we need an entire day for digital literacy training for all our CRPs, considering they're all at different literacy levels. They all have different accesses to the phone. Some have used them, some have not. Some have only been using feature phones. The others have used a smartphone, etc. And I think 2 days for a run through of what the app is about, the different features, and lastly, an entire day of practice sessions where we ensured that the CRPs were able to fill out the forms properly, do the registration, do the follow-up, the sales, orders, etc. So I think so for Jacobabad and Bahawalpur and Kamrushadad Court, we see that the minute the CRPs were adept at filling out their information in the app, they were concentrating more on their sales pitch. They were spending more time doing their household visits rather than compared to how when Bahawalpur and Kamrushadad Court CRPs were more interested in what the RSPN team is going to check when they come for a monitoring visit, that all their data, hand-filled data is complete versus just uploading all that information in an app. So we see that for Jacobabad, when we introduced the app, we were able to sell, I think, 40,000 Velma sachets in the first month compared to just 7,000 for Bahawalpur and a similar number of Velma sachets in the first month when we began in March 2022 for both Bahawalpur and Kamrushadad Court. So you see the difference. So that's like 40,000 Jacobabad and just 7,000 sachets in Bahawalpur and Kamrushadad Court. So I think the app played a huge role in helping all of us improve sales, improve their sales pitch, their marketing, entrepreneurial skills, etc. So yes, the credit
Okay.
goes to all the partners. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I know I absolutely I want to emphasize that it's not just, we could take all the credit for building the app, but there's a lot more that goes into actually rolling out the app. And if you and one of the lessons learned is that you have to invest in training your field force and investing that initial 3-4 days of really almost day-long trainings. And we had second thoughts about that, Aisha, frankly, because a team of 4 or 5 people from Circle Hall would have to go all the way to Jacobabad and all of that, and that's a lot of logistics involved. But that's an investment that paid off very well at the end. So careful planning, making sure that you invest enough time to train people on the digital solution that you're putting out there is very, very important, and one of the important lessons learned for others who have joined this session. So let me switch gears back to Claire, over to you now. I think you came up with this idea of that we would probably should look at what are some of the spillover effects this would have, because it was a very interesting model, because you had a lot of CRPs who for the very first time were exposed to a digital technology, got their hands on a smartphone for the very first time. So you were also interested in it, was that what else they would do with their phone and what kind of impact it would have on their social status, and how they're able to use digital technology and weave it into their day-to-day life. So over to you, and tell us more about that empowerment survey and what did you learn from it?
Thanks, Imran. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I want to make just two other add-on points while this other slide is still up, just to encourage people during the discussion session. Some of you might find it interesting to ask Aisha also about the logistics of managing the phone distribution and the policies that RSPN came up with for how to handle that, because of course there were a lot of concerns about the value of the phones and what would happen with them, et cetera. And I think RSPN has handled that really well. I also wanted to point on the right-hand side of the slide, in the middle of the circle, there's that extra component, which is the guiding features. Aisha talked about the increase in productivity, but I just wanted to link back again to the thought of this business model having dual objectives of generating earnings for the CRPs, the women themselves who were making the sales, but also getting the product to the right women. And that was or to the women who would benefit the most, that is. And that was a capability of the app that we didn't have with the paper system that was really powerful, that it could remind remind the CRPs to go and visit a woman who might be out of stock because she'd purchased a certain number of days ago, or to sort of prioritize women who had been identified as more undernourished. And so it could help also sort of shape the social benefits side of things. But yeah, turning then to this extra little data collection activity we did in collaboration with SERP and RSPN, we thought this was a really exciting opportunity to look at the effects on the CRPs themselves. So them not only as a way to reach women in their communities, but how did their own lives change? So we ended up doing kind of a retrospective pre-post study in which a couple months after starting their work as a CRP, we asked them about a bunch of facets. How often did they use their phone? For what? Who else in their family used their phone? Other elements of how they did their work. We asked them how were they doing it now? And then we also asked them to reflect back before they had become a CRP, whose phone did they use, how often, etc. And the findings of this study were really powerful. So not surprisingly, we found that all of the CRPs were using their phone daily. They did mention using it for other purposes, like helping their kids with educational activities as well. And then when we looked at the benefits to the CRPs in terms of various measures of empowerment, as Aisha mentioned, there was a really large increase in mobile money usage that the CRPs reported. They also reported using their phones to have digital conversations with women outside their own families, so strengthening their social networks. A lot of that, of course, is about the sales force, but not exclusively. Also, really interestingly, although Aisha mentioned that having no mobility restrictions was a requirement for becoming a CRP, when we asked women, were they allowed to move around their village by themselves, with a family escort, with other women, were they comfortable going outside their village. We saw improvements on those domains as well. So as they got more accustomed to doing this, their families, it seemed, also became more accustomed to their freedom of movement. And also, really interestingly, although SERP and RSPN worked really hard, as Imran described, to sort of minimize the features of the phone, and build it with voice recognition so that CRPs didn't even have to type, or if at most they were just, clicking on buttons. Nonetheless, CRPs reported that they were becoming more comfortable with both reading and writing, which we can't disentangle if that's because they're a CRP now and they're, specifically using the app for those purposes versus just access to the phone in general. But we thought that was also really exciting. And finally, we used a kind of cumulative measure called the MacArthur scale of subjective social status, in which you ask a person, where are the most, if you imagine a ladder, on what rung of that ladder are the most respected people in your society, and on what rung are you? Universally, all the CRPs said that they felt they had moved up the rungs of the ladder by nature of being a CRP. So I think we've only saved a few minutes for questions, but we're definitely excited to hear from participants and answer any lingering questions that the presentation and discussion have left.
Yeah, and we have actually 8 to 10 minutes for that because we started 3 minutes late. So I hope the people who are overseeing this will allow us to spill over maybe 3 or 4 minutes past the hour. So over to you, participants. Please have your questions over to us. I think there are some questions that are already in there. I don't see a lot of introductions yet because I think it's being YouTubed also, being broadcast on YouTube. So one of the questions is, perhaps I missed this, what kind of educational literacy level were the CRPs at? So the CRPs were required, and most of the CRPs, and Asha, maybe you can answer this question actually. Why don't I direct it to you?
I think I already replied. So according to our criteria, CRPs had to have cleared grade 5 or above, but majority of our CRPs fell between, so 20% of our CRPs had only cleared, only had primary education, and 30% had cleared middle school, and the remaining had done their matriculation.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Saad is asking these questions. Why didn't you use any open source applications available for the same purpose? So Saad, one thing you have to realize is that, I don't know if you missed that slide in the beginning that Aisha showed, because I mean, every business has its own process, right? So it's not just about taking, I think we lost it.
Yeah, it's okay. I think just for the discussion, they suggested that we just have.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I was spooked. I thought, maybe the session has ended.
No.
Sorry. No, but I lost the list of the video or the mug shots of all of us on the side also. But anyway, probably my desktop. Yeah. So what I was saying was that look, I mean, at the end of the day, two things. One is that every business has its own model, and I think there was one slide that Aisha had shown where there were about 8 or 10 different steps in terms of what needed to happen behind the scenes before the product is ordered, comes to the warehouse, gets allocated to supervisors. The supervisors give the bunch that they need to give to each CRP. Then the CRPs need to report back the stock, how much they have used, when they should be replenished. CRPs are placing orders. So all of that is a fairly complex process in the back end, right? So it's not just a simple data entry thing, that you could just get something off the shelf. And then, so that's one point. And my second point would be that, this is the typical, if you're coming from a technology or a product management background, this is the typical conversation that happens of, whether you should build or you should, use something off the shelf, right? Off the shelf is easy, but you have to realize the couple of things we had to do. We were working in very challenging environments. Sometimes the bandwidth will be available. Sometimes it will not be available. And then we use what we call the human-centered design principle, where we sat down with the users. Initially, when we prototyped and we had a click-through prototype, we sat down with the CRPs to make sure that what we were building will actually work, right? So it's literally screen by screen, and what Claire was mentioning, what are the right prompts, what's the right color coding, how do you nudge a CRP, that, oh, here's a high potential PLW, and you don't seem to have visited that PLW over the last 1 week, and they might be running out of their supply of Velma. So maybe you need to go out there and check on them. So all these small features actually contribute a lot more to the power of the platform. So again, that trade-off between custom-built solution, which is tailored just right, is designed with the user to the user's specification versus taking something off the shelf. Sorry, long answer, but we are very passionate about creating solutions which exactly meet the needs of the target community. So hence my answer. So there are two more questions here. How did you ensure that the data collection was ethically done? So I'll take a punt on that and hand it over to Aisha, because this is out in the field.
Right. So we have multiple layers of monitoring at both the district level and the head office level. So all the CRPs are assigned to their respective capacity building officers who continuously monitor and validate their data entry as well as sales information. The capacity building officers are then monitored by their respective district project officers, who again also have to take up a certain, they also have to validate a certain percentage of information that's being put in. The district level team is then monitored by the RSP and head office level team. We conduct monthly monitoring visits to our target districts. And again, we have a sample, a fixed sample that we have to monitor and validate every time that we visit the field. That's done both by the project manager as well as the monitoring, the specific monitoring and M&E officer for this project as well. So we ensure at all levels that the data is ethically entered. For this was also for both for paper-based as well as since we've introduced the app. But for the app, I think Imran, you would have a better response for this. That all the features in the features that we've included that ensure that data is not over-reported or under-reported. All those systems have also been put into place. If you want to elaborate.
Yeah, just thank you, Aisha, for that. And I think two parts to that. The last comment, Aisha. I think one is that obviously, a lot of this is training the CRPs that they're collecting the data that you're collecting. But I think in some way, the digital platform also enforces the discipline, right? Because you're going to enter data what the system wants you to enter, right, or what the screen in front of you is asking you to enter. So that's one thing. But then another very important aspect is who has access to this data. So behind the scene, there is a security model of the app, and then each user that's created who has access to this system, whether that's CRP or whether that's supervisor or that's an admin officer who has to run reports on the back end, they would have different level of data access, right? And the right people would have access to the right kind of information. So there is a security model built, in the back end that would help facilitate to make sure that that nobody has unauthorized access to data. So you talked about ethical data collection, but then there's the data security and who has access to what parts of the data is also very important, and that's also built into the system. I hope that answered the question. There is another comment: voice recognition is a great tool for people with different levels of literacy, but did you have to transcribe this for standardization? Yeah, I mean, we have experimented. I mean, I think we have. I think the voice recognition was also in the sense that a lot of prompts in the application, because the CRPs will be using it, not necessarily would be able to understand what the captions of the different fields will be. So you will actually be able to touch a field, and the application will speak to you that this is the data that you need to enter here. So so it's voice recognition in that sense also, that the application is recognizing what you're trying to tell it, that it should, what you're trying to do, it will guide you to do that or take that action. So that's less less sort of problematic than actually being able to recognize a lot of different voices when you're generally transcribing something in a longer text. And then the question is, what would you kindly share the business model again? I apologize, I got disconnected because I'm struggling with poor internet connection. Yeah, I mean, I think I think that will take a little bit more time. I'll skip on that, but what I would encourage you is to follow us on our channels, and I think perhaps some of this material and even this video will be uploaded to the YouTube channel, so you can watch that and quickly go through. I think I would say that maybe from the first 5 minutes to about 20 minutes, if you watch that 15-minute clip, you will be able to find out what the business model was. So sorry, I'm asking you to do some work, but that's that. And you can access, that has already been added. I'll take just 1 minute. We are at 1 minute over. We started at 6:03 and it's 7:04. So I'll close this by saying that, if you build for the user, if you keep the challenges that you'll have to face in the field in terms of internet connectivity, you take them into account in a system that you're building, and most importantly, if you keep the user center stage, use human-centered design, which is a fancy way of saying that, make sure that you sit with the users, you try to understand how they do their day-to-day work, what their capability is, how far they can go in terms of adopting a digital solution, and then build based on the needs and capabilities of the target community. All of that pays in terms of building a solution that actually works. And secondly, you have to invest in making sure that when you're onboarding your target community that you are giving this solution to, you have to invest in initial training and digital literacy and spend a few days with them and do test runs. And we even had a test database where people could go in and just play with the app and all of that. So if you invest in all of that, and if you do all of your homework, then you can get the kind of results that we got in this implementation. With that clear, Aisha, if you want to say any last words, otherwise we will close the session. Over to you, Claire. Anything you want to say? Aisha, anything you want to say? Last words?
Just appreciation to the organizers and for everyone who joined today. This is great. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. Thank you for having us. And honestly, it feels great to share the success of the project, both SERP and Mathematica. So thank you.
And RSPN, of course, and you. It was a great collaboration. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.